for at Pro Tour Baltimore there. On the left-hand side, it is Bryce Stroyek. And excuse me, Taotao Chu at 2-1 alongside Bryce Stroyek. So a little bit of misinformation on our pairings there. My apologies, but still a fine start for Taotao. And we're going to see how he takes on this Lexi.
Mm-hmm. Everything looks very standard from the equipment setup that I can see so far. We do see the Nerf Scalpel as a second weapon, but usually not swung. It seems like that much in that matchup. Premeditate up on there. Up on the card reader. Fun to run at home is like we like to call it, but does its job. The Lexi matchup, the thing I'm most interested in seeing a lot of these Lexi decks is how much ice they're splashing, if they're splashing at all. I know most Lexis have moved off of ice, but they've started actually, we've come all the way back around with them or incorporating it more to get an edge in the mirror.
Yeah, and an interesting start here already from Taotao. It is going to be just a dagger, a spider's bite coming in, then annihilate the armed, it looks like, and that's going to be backed up by a shred. So silver already created, and we already see a different tact being taken by this Azuri with both Mask of Perdition and Black Tech Whisperers in that equipment slot. I think Taotao's going to be looking to rebuild some of that equipment as this game goes on.
Absolutely, and we see a drill shot in the arsenal for Lexi here, drawing up 4 cards. Surely to have an explosive turn. I think the tempo is very important in this matchup, so trying to see those 3 of a kinds as soon as possible. And we'll have to check if there's Rain Razors in the list, but I think if we look at the Lexi list, there's 2 cards we really that's a card I was not expecting to be pitched by the Lexi player there.
Yeah, it looks like a captain's call going to be the play. And we mentioned these Lexi lists quite diverse. They're really doing a lot of different stuff in finding their setups. And yeah, it looks like captain's call is the order of the day for Bryce Stroyek here.
Yeah, a blue captain's call with the two resources floating, I think, because the one you used off Voltaire. Surely buffing the Bolton shot here so that it gets its inherent go again. Just presenting the question to Taotao, no on-hit trigger here, I think. And then potentially reloading the Falcon wing, and then we're going to see our first block.
Yeah, and again, a heavy contract build from Taotao. We see another contract being used. Obviously a fan of that mechanic. Some folks out there may be a little disappointed by the amount of contracts showing up for Assassin's Go Around. Don't worry, we'll get you in the future. There'll be more contracts.
Yeah, and Taotao here down to a single card in hand with 1 card in arsenal. Lexi on their turn presenting 3 arrows to deal with. A lot of pressure for Taotao. I'm interested to see Taotao's game plan if it is going to be more of a mid-range, blocking out with that 2 to 3 cards, coming back with 1 to 2 as well, just trying to get as much value as possible.
Yeah, here's Isolate kicking things off. It is going to be an activation of the Azuri ability. Bryce says go for it, and it is going to be Command and Conquer. That's what you want to see as the Azuri player into this matchup. One of the reasons why I believe Azuri might be just what the Doctor ordered against these Lexi decks, perhaps the most fearsome Command and Conquers in all of Flesh and Blood.
Brian, how do you think about Command and Conquer versus, a single arsenal versus two? Do you think you hold on to it waiting for that double blowout, or do you just get value?
Look, everything's contextual in Flesh and Blood, right? A lot of it is going to be about the makeup of your hand. A lot of it's going to be about your game plan. In general, I like just firing off as they come. I think you need to keep your game plan moving forward. You need to keep presenting that damage. Azuri doing this mid-range thing, pressuring you with disruption, with damage, with actual deck size in the instance of these contract effects. So you really need to keep forward momentum and make sure you're threatening your opponent on the vast majority of turns. And here we see, I believe, my first premeditate of the day, another Outsiders banger that has absolutely changed the way many of these Rangers decks, although again, a point of contention in these Lexi decks. There is no stock Lexi list. I think it's very important to emphasize that as we go throughout the day. You'll see people without premeditates. You'll see people maxing on premeditates. All flavors of Lexi are going to be here.
Premeditate, honestly, one of my favorite new cards. Like to play it in the Briar list. I also played in my Lexi list. That Ponder token can just be so strong. It is not quite as powerful as something like Plunder Run, but gets pretty close. We do see the Bolton shot, obviously, here coming in for 8, followed up by this Heat Seeker.
Looking over at Taotao's list, it does look to be a very similar, long game focused list, much the same way we saw Arachne have success. There's a bunch of D-reacts, things like Sigil of Solace to gain a little bit of life. Even last-ditch efforts in the list, calling back to the early days of Flesh and Blood. And when you see last-ditch effort, you generally expect to be in for the long haul. So let's see how Taotao wants to play this one.
Yeah, seeing 2 last-ditch efforts and 3 Remembrance in this list now makes me wonder what kind of long game plan we're on. Looks like we're going to be doing a lot of defending, which we've seen over the past 2 turns. We have seen Taotao defending a lot of the attacks, going down to that single card in hand. Although the Command and Conquer was a very sort of tempo-oriented play, I think we will sort of slow down a bit on the Azuri side here throughout the game.
Like that Winter's Bite going to go ahead and get the Tunic counter here. Is going to still present a Frostbite from the Lexi ability. What does Bryce have for a follow-up here? Is the offensive output going to be there? Looking a little bit at Bryce's list, sort of hedging a little bit. 2 copies of Art of War in the list. So, again, a very contentious inclusion. You generally look to that as an indicator of how aggressive you expect these lists to be. 2 copies is kind of like, I'll be medium aggressive.
Yeah, honestly, there's a few things in this list that are pretty interesting. We do have the 1 Heavens clause. I do think that is to go with Codex Frailty, flip up, get the go again, and then play. Of course, 3 Rain Razors, so we will need to look out for that. And I do believe the Art of War there is a dichotomy between the Lexi players that are playing Art of War and those that are not. I know we saw Michael Hamilton earlier, I believe, playing the card.
Taotao looking to just clean up on defense here, able to use that Mask of Perdition and Fate Foreseen, getting those counters. Only 1 silver thus far, so not quite ready for the rebuy yet. But as we mentioned, those contracts are present. Taotao going to look to make silver when possible. Get a little bit of extra defense value.
Yeah, here comes in Searing Shot. On hit trigger is going to take another life from Taotao, so very incentivized to fully block this and not take the extra trigger and give Lexi that additional value. Brian, I got to ask you, when it comes to Lexi decks and sort of your macro strategy against these more defensive decks, are you just playing around your big pivot turns in the form of something like 3 of the Kind and Endless Arrow? And do you think if you're in the seat of Bryce right now, you've seen that you're playing against Azuri, but it's not the game plan that you're used to, right? There's a lot of defending going on. You're seeing a lot of cards you maybe don't usually see. You see an Oasis or Spite. You need to start pitching for the late game to potentially set up very powerful hands on the second cycle.
It has to be on your mind, for sure. You have to be considering, do you have enough resources to actually go ahead and close this game out? But one of the things that's changed the most, probably fundamentally, about Lexi is how many more power cards there are in the deck. There's just so many ways for you to produce damage, even going, to the quiver. And I believe that is the quiver of Abyssal Depths we see on the side of Bryce. So potential rebuy for 3 arrows there. Plenty of just codexes and 3 of a kinds and rain razors and just all these powerful cards packed in. And I think you're way more willing in this case to just kind of stay aggressive, keep your foot on the gas, represent damage on as many turns as possible. But we'll have to see if Bryce does start thinking about, set up for that long game. And pretty critical banish there. 3 of a kind going the way of the dinosaur, being picked off by that contract for Taotao. And that critically giving that second silver, meaning that Mask of Perdition ready to be rebought. And this is an element of Azuri that I think has legitimately been underutilized thus far by players.
Brian, I was going to say, when we saw no blocks or no attempt to even block, it sort of was like a snap no block on the first attack that Taotao presented. I was like, I think that Bryce might have 3 of a kind in hand. We saw the 3 of a kind banish. I mean, it's only going to be 1 more 3 of a kind in the deck. That's a serious card economy issue potentially if we're going to go to the late game.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I said, it's been mitigated. You have more powerful cards to play. You have your codexes. You have your even Premeditate sort of filling that role of power card. Of course, Rain Razor's present. But you still want to play your 3 of a kinds. You're not trying to just give up on them, that's for sure.
Yeah, Brian, sort of my philosophy against these more defensive and maybe even fatigue-oriented lists, which I'm not sure Taotao is completely on, but at least a list that blocks a lot. I think it's very important to, you can present big hands every single turn, but it's critical to have those pivot turns where you go above the value 12. You go above sort of the standard defense value of a defensive deck like this, so you can leak those significant points of damage. Because if we do play the long game, and Taotao blocks for 10, he blocks for 12, he's dumping his hand, likely the Lexi will run out of arrows.
Pretty critical on hit here, and Heatseeker potentially able to go ahead and up that arsenal. And that 3 of a kind not been used yet, just kind of sitting there threatening, maybe getting ready to head on to the next turn. What exactly is the play here from Bryce? It looks like Taotao going to go ahead and line up 7 block onto that Heatseeker. And it is just going to be an arsenal for Bryce. So Bryce threatening a huge turn next go around. Is Taotao going to be able to find enough disruption, enough answers here to go ahead and slow down some of that offensive output? Yeah. And it looks like a pitched Plague Hive here. Very interesting. This is an important randomization here, Brendan. Maybe our first sighting of Plague Hive on the weekend.
I think so. Like I was saying with Bryce, I do think that is the correct decision with the 3 of a kind. Save it for you when you do have the double arsenal. But, if Taotao potentially had more cards in hand, it did telegraph, hey, I'm about to have a big turn. You need to try to disrupt me.
But a huge win there for Taotao, given what's in the arsenal. Able to hit the Frailty
Wow.
off of a plague hive. I mean, you're talking about saving 4 or 5 life potentially off just that randomization. Only a 33% chance, but Taotao coming up big there.
I mean, that is the absolute best case scenario that could have happened.
Plague Hive, a very, very powerful card. You know, some of these Azuri lists playing it, some not. Not really seeing a ton of play in Rangers anymore, but an interesting option to be sure. And you see how big the power spikes can be off that card.
Yeah, I do think that Bryce has drawn the other three of a kind as well. Must just be groaning at this frailty token. It is absolutely devastating for what would have been potentially the sort of game shifting turn.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you're talking, 30 plus damage off a
Yeah.
double 3 of a kind hand, and now Frailty going to be doing a lot of work to slow that down.
Yeah, if I'm Bryce, I'm just throwing out an arrow, an arrow here, maybe two, redraw my hand. I don't think you can be greedy enough to keep the double three of a kind. That is a lot. Maybe we pitch one of them. Oh, goes out and plays it. So this frailty token is definitely going to be doing some work on this turn.
Yeah, it's going to get 3 new cards here. See what kind of offense Bryce can find. Activates Lexi, flips up a drill shot. Drill shot, kind of a weird card in the context of this matchup. You certainly love to pick off those key equipments before they get their block in, but of course are able to be recycled potentially.
Yeah, I was hearing from a lot of Lexi players that this drill shot, although being a well-statted arrow, is quite good in the Oldhim matchup, specifically. But 0 for 4, it has piercing 1. I mean, you really can't complain.
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly 0 for 5, 0 for 6 sometimes. I think this is one of the most powerful arrows these Rangers have seen in quite some time. I'm not surprised to see it become a real feature of these deck lists.
Brian, do you think that it's possible we're going to see the double three of the kind here, or do you think surely the second one will be arsenaled for a follow-up explosive turn?
It feels like this is just supposed to be an arsenal. I mean, you just give up so much equity. When we're talking about playing against a defensive deck and like needing that long-term payout, you need to go ahead and steady yourself for a long game. It makes a lot of sense to me to just say, okay, you got that 3 of a kind, congratulations, but I have another one coming on the next turn. I'll save it for when I'm not under the threat of frailty.
Yeah, frailty doing so much work on that last turn.
Big life save for Taotao, and on Taotao's side, it looks like just going to go ahead, use those silver, get a little buyback here. Mask of Perdition ready to go once more.
We do have yet to see a Codex. Yeah, a Codex of Frailty, one of the key cards in the matchup, which we saw Hamilton use in round 1. Oh, speak of the devil, there it is.
That's a big one. Is going to get back that Command and Conquer. As we mentioned, Codex of Frailty, I think at its best, and look, its best is really, really good, but at its absolute best, when it's sort of recycling the same thing on a turn-to-turn basis, you know your best card in the matchup, you just want it over and over and over again. I think of playing something like the Azalea Lexi matchup. You just want red in the ledger every single turn. That's your main game plan. Here, on the Azuri side, get me those Command and Conquers. I want to Command and Conquer as many turns as I possibly can.
Yeah, and that Ponder token as well, going to draw Taotao another card at the end of the turn, potentially give him an arsenal on the back of this as well. I mean, Codex of Frailty, that is quite the flesh and blood card.
I'm going to do a little math to see how much value that... Yeah, 143 points of value off that Codex.
That is less than round 1. I believe it was 263.
No, it was 6-something round 1. That was a really good one. This pretty mediocre one, only 100-some points.
I think we will see this play continually where we do go down to the 1 card in hand and then play Codex of Frailty, recycle like Man and Conquer. I think this is going to be a consistent loop for Taotao here.
I think so. You see that beautiful Marvel Codex of Frailty.
Ooh, we lose an Endless Arrow. That is a key arrow in this kind of matchup.
Yeah, a lot of key cards. And, you can't ignore the threat density aspect of Azuri. The more you come in with those contracts, the more you just annoy your opponent, the worse their deck gets, and that really does matter.
Wow, Brian, and the 3 of a kind is played as well. I would have thought we were setting up the 3 of a kind for sort of a big turn, and we have the Frailty token here. We've lost 2 cards.
And we're out, man.
That is the last 3 of a kind.
We're done with 3 of a kind. And if you're Taotao, sitting at 31 life, you have to feel great about having faded those 3 of a kinds already.
Absolutely.
Let's see what Bryce can put together here. So far, none of those real explosive turns we expect to see from Lexi. Remorseless, a nice start here.
Yeah, and I've seen a Sleep Dart in hand as well. So this is going to be a big... We see Nourishing Emptiness out of Azuri here. Nourishing Emptiness, a pretty interesting inclusion, don't you think?
It is. It is. Again, Nourishing Emptiness strikes me as a card being somewhat underplayed. It is so powerful in the abstract. I don't know if I had it on my radar as like an Azuri card, something they would be using all that often, but here we are.
So, Brian, you're a big believer in the turn one equity of Nourishing Emptiness?
I guess so. Yeah. It's got a very high ceiling, right?
Yeah.
That's what mostly appeals to me about Nourishing Emptiness.
I think that, coming into the mid game here, if you're Taotao, you feel great. We haven't seen any Rain Razors yet, but we have seen three of a kinds, which is by far the most important card. Taotao has played one codex. We assume that Bryce has 3 codexes left in the deck, unless I've missed one that's gone to the graveyard. But looking great for Taotao.
Yeah, and just another contract coming in. This one's going to be Plunder the Poor.
What I love about this Azuri deck, too, is that, we didn't have many Azuri players show up at all, but I think that this deck is actually quite differentiated from the ones that, are stock standard. We did have, I think, a couple of Azuri's top 8, the most recent Battle Hardens.
Yep.
Battle Hardened Columbus, and I believe SCG Richmond, but those lists did not look like.
No, they were not particularly interested in contracts, which I think is interesting. A lot of players identifying contracts as, oh, these are the Arachne cards, but I think Azuri has some room to leverage these cards as well, and you see the threat of this mask just taking card after card away from Bryce. I mean, I believe we're 5 or 6 cards down now. And when you think back to how we presented Lexi early on in our discussion, and we said something like this Quiver of Rustling Leaves being a huge add because it's able to rebuy 3 arrows. Well, what does it mean then when Taotao is able to strip 6 cards from your deck? That's a pretty huge swing that I think we undervalue a little bit sometimes as Flesh and Blood players.
And those arrows in the Banish Zone as well. I've been really impressed, to be honest. I think at this rate, like Bryce's life total is quite low. Taotao has been applying pressure on top of, I think, progressing what looks to be incredible fatigue or attrition game plan. So kind of attacking on both angles here, to be honest.
Yeah, and it looks like we are going to see a double defense react on this pumped Endless Arrow. I believe that's Inertia Trap plus a Fate Foreseen. Just go ahead and cleaning this up, and that's going to go ahead and give that Inertia token to Bryce. So Taotao just with all the answers here. Follow-up Heatseeker is the play from Bryce. So a nice end to the chain, but it looks like Taotao just happy to block this out. And that tells me Taotao is I was very much looking to go towards fatigue now.
I was going to say, I think that the game plan is very clear right now. Taotao will take value trades when possible. That Command and Conquer, Codex Frailty, recycling it. But it does look like we are in sort of a more fatigue-oriented matchup, which is thus why we have the contract cards. And we see blocks like that. I mean, you said something there where you said, all the answers. I think that perfectly encapsulates Taotao's match so far. It has been an absolute clinic.
Yeah, and this looks like a deck purposely built, as we mentioned, to prey on these Lexis. I think that's why you see these Azuri show up, and there's not a lot of them, but I think the players who did chose to go this route very much had this sort of game plan in mind. Let's see if Taotao can finish it up, because there's still a long way to go, and we saw that matchup in round 1, the same Lexi versus Azuri matchup, and it swung back and forth so many times. Still a lot of room for Bryce to maneuver here and find some ways in.
Yeah, I think that we often find those matches swinging off those key cards like the 3 of a kinds and like the Rain Razors. Nevertheless, Lexi is an explosive and it's hard to deal with, right? There's a reason why it's the most popular deck. There are reasons why it's sort of the premier aggro deck in the format. It asks the question and you have to answer. But Taotao sort of flipped the script 29-18. He's been asking the question and firmly in the driver's seat so far.
And it's just so annoying if you're in Bryce's seat now because you're worried about every single axis. You have to worry about your deck size. You have to worry about your life total. You have to worry about threat density. And that is where these assassins really shine, just asking so many different questions of their opponents. And you see Taotao, again, very much planning for that long game. Winter's Bite being played. It's going to be a pitched Command and Conquer. Going to have that the next cycle around. An Arctic Incarceration here from Bryce. What do you think about that into the Azuri matchup?
So I saw it in the hand. I was going to ask you. So it's a red Arctic Incarceration. I wonder, I mean, I doubt it's specifically for the Azuri matchup. I do wonder what matchup it is for, if it is for the mirror, if it's giving more fuse targets to potentially some other arrows that could need that. But I don't think that Taotao is going to be too fussed by something like that because
I don't think he cares at all.
Even if he has to take, like, per se, he had to take a turn off, which he doesn't, by the way. He doesn't have to take a turn off. I think he would say, no problem, right? I'm just going to block you out again. And once I have my arsenal card plus my one card I keep in my hand, I take the value trade, and then we rinse and repeat that cycle.
And here you see a big assassin threat coming through. It is Leave No Witnesses, of course, introduced alongside Arachne back in Dynasty. Unquestionably one of the standouts alongside things like surgical extraction, eradicate, this sort of cycle of red, yellow, blue threats that are capable of banishing multiple cards from your opponent and providing some disruption. Real all-star here.
You know, Brian, we started off this cast with you asking me what I thought, how I thought Lexi would face into Azuri, and I was like, I think that Lexi is favored. After seeing Taotao's deck and seeing sort of how this matchup is going, I might be switching that answer.
Yeah, and look at this as well. There is a shred from Taotao going to force through that leave no witnesses, meaning the card leaves from Arsenal, as well as the top of the deck. 2 silver, ready to rebuy Black Tech Whisperers, Mask of Perdition, all the above, and that means more defensive options for Taotao. Everything going his way right now.
Yeah, and it did take away Premeditate, which I think is somewhat of a critical card for Bryce as a pump that does create that Ponder token potentially. So, I mean, we've seen multiple hits off contract cards here that if I was in Bryce's seat, I would audibly groan, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, look how many cards down Bryce is at this point. So many cards lost to this onslaught, and here we see a Codex of Frailty, offering sort of the best one-card hand that Codex can represent. It is going to go ahead and drop that Death Touch,
Yep.
but again, I think Taotao's just in a position where this card does not offer much threat, and there we just see blocked out, ready to go to the next turn, and, going to play with the Frailty token, but I think you can live with that if you're Taotao.
Yeah, I want to point out this is a one of Death Touch in the deck, so I think that this is the exact play that we would kind of see looped, right? This Codex of Frailty recurring the Death Touch and then playing it kind of over and over. Has made the conscious decision to just play one Death Touch.
So it is going to be Frailty for Taotao going into this next turn. Blunting those daggers a little bit, but is able to offer that Command and Conquer from Arsenal. Is going to be dropped down to 5 due to the Frailty, but if you're Taotao, you're just demanding an answer. Like, this is demanding more cards.
I'll tell you, 5 and 6 are pretty close to the same thing with when most of Rangers cards block for 3.
Very true.
So I think that, Bryce, although getting value off of the Frailty token here, is still faced with the same question that he would have been faced with if that token did not exist.
Yeah, funny enough, there is a Captain's Call in hand for Bryce, so this is going to allow a clean block here with Captain's Call plus Arrow should Bryce want. But, man, you just look at that body language on the part of Bryce and looks uncomfortable, right? That's what Azuri does to you, makes you uncomfortable.
Honestly, from Bryce's perspective, I do think that the Lexi deck is in deep water right now. You need to come up with an answer to the puzzle that's presented in front of you, and it's looking pretty bad. You've lost the tools that would usually give you those outs, so you're going to have to find a much more creative way to try and win this matchup, because just playing out your hand, just playing hand-to-hand, just trying to get value, it's not going to work. This game plan is obviously tech against the deck you've brought, and now you've got to figure it out sort of live on the fly.
Yep.
Worst feeling, by the way, in a tournament.
It's tough. It's really tough. And look, I'm not counting chickens here. I'm not trying to say Bryce is out of this by any stretch of the imagination. But all the momentum on Taotao's side, Bryce is the one under pressure to figure out an answer. Is just going to go ahead and block with 2 arrows here. Double Searing Shot committed to defense. So wanting the resources probably from that Captain's Call heading into this next turn.
This really feels like an Azuri deck that was tech to beat the Pro Tour Baltimore meta, which we talked about, in the lead up to this game, was a hard meta to predict. I think the hardest in Tier 4 event history. I think that being tech to beat Lexi and doing it in this fashion shows amazing deck building skills out of Taotao here.
I agree with you. And it is just going to be a bolt and shot buffed by Captain's Call here. So not using the resources. And just a perfect block there. Mask of Perdition, committed to defense. Oasis Respite, completing the block, and now that mask ready to the next time a contract is presented, go ahead and double up that banish, and it just all looks so good in Taotao's position. Spider's Bite going to make things more uncomfortable on Bryce's side as that chips away.
You know what, Brian? One thing I want to mention is I would wager that when Bryce pre-boarded into this matchup, pre-boarded for pretty much the opposite of what's happening right now, did not expect to be facing fatigue. These Lexi decks, they know that they're going to be subject to fatigue decks in this format, but the only deck that's doing that right now is Oldhim and to an extent Dash. So I think that while Bryce might have tools in his deck to be able to deal with that kind of strategy, likely did not bring them in to a Azuri matchup.
Ooh, and look at this play. It is a shakedown off the Azuri ability, going to be lined up with that mask, and just huge damage, huge disruption to Bryce. Going to go ahead and banish that top card one more time. Takes a look at the hand, going to go ahead and get the best option here, depending on the color chosen. We'll see if Taotao found a red name. He did. Going to go ahead and take the arrow there.
Yeah, shakedown sort of It's sort of the marquee card that came out for Uzuri. Everybody thought about, Uzuriing in Shakedown, getting the value of taking a card from hand as well as banishing one from deck. I know that a lot of Uzuri decks have, they had Pummel initially because, like, the value of pummeling that card off of Tunic is insane. But it looks like we've moved away from it, to be honest, a bit.
Yeah,
Since the early
on
days.
Taotao's side, it's 7 shreds. It's 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 3 blues. And, shred, that's a heck of a flesh and blood card. Honestly, one of the best attack reactions ever, where all you care about is forcing through those on hits. It's not about damage, it's about disruption when it comes to Uzuri. And Shred is so good at that job.
Yeah. Endless Arrow, a key arrow for Bryce here, being able to recur it. Bryce being on a sort of low deck count, losing threat density, really wants to keep this Endless Arrow in hand, give recur it back to hand. But I would also assume that Taotao knows this is one of sort of the key cards left to continually get value for Bryce, and will likely stop the on-hit trigger if possible, assuming no Rain Razors. But I do think he saw the Rain Razors.
He knows about the Rain Razors, so we do see a block for 9.
Yep. Smart play.
Amnesia. Double blocking there. Don't see a lot of Amnesias creeping into deck lists, finally. A very interesting card when it hits the hero. Cards and tokens they own lose and can't gain names until the start of your next turn. Taotao may be a little prescient in terms of the Katsus that are showing up this weekend. I mean, look, it's just a solid 6 damage, defend for 3. It has some niche applications. It's extremely strong against Katsu.
Yep, 2 for 6, it blocks for 3. I think that the opportunity cost, potentially having a couple of those in your deck for for maybe Katsu, what you think will show up, it's not too high. I think if the card blocked for 2, it'd be maybe a bit more of a dubious decision, but I think it's, a fine card from Taotao here.
And I saw Taotao's hand. Just extremely good defensive options. There's red unmovable. There's also the ability to gain life off Sigil of Solace. So just strong defensive options for Taotao. And look at this pile of cards that Bryce is sorting through. That's a large pile with Taotao sitting at 29 life right now.
I'll tell you, Brian, this is a cathartic moment for any Flesh and Blood player as they face down a fatigue matchup, especially one where they weren't preparing to be fatigued. As they get to the lower end of their deck, maybe start to see second cycle. We're getting very close. You start to look to your graveyard. Just feel like, please, can there please be one more 3 of a kind left in this deck?
Tell me there's something good left. And we do see a Rain Razor still present. That's a real card. Voltaire going to be activated here. Loads up an Infecting Shot.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Rain Razors has supporting cards. You would usually want to be able to get enough value out of that. It's still a good card, but obviously Taotao knows it's in hand. And has a very healthy life total. Wow, there's an immovable as well.
Yeah, just a very clean block here from Taotao. Going to go ahead and consider the possibility of that Rain Razors as well. Follow up Voltaire. It's going to be Searing Shot this time. Representing a theoretical 6 on the back of that Rain Razors.
This Uzuri deck reminds me a lot of sort of the original Katsu control deck, mostly blocking out, but then going for Kadachi threat, but what it is in this deck is, present little attack, swap out with Uzuri, command and conquer you, get value. A very hard strategy to deal with when you're playing something like Lexi.
Yeah, and no sync there from Taotao. Just going to go ahead, pop off that Sigil, now moves to a extremely comfortable 32 life. How about a Codex to follow it up? Using all the parts of the Buffalo here, going to go ahead, use that Frailty token, get the Ponder to juice up the arsenal. Believe Leave No Witnesses going to be the play here, and that is going to be played from Arsenal, offering that annoying disruption.
Absolutely. Taking more cards from Bryce here.
Basically demands 2 cards. You don't have a choice against this card, unless you want to give up your Tunic or your New Horizons, and I don't think you're winning this game if that happens. So
yeah, surely not the New Horizons, and with the Tunic being on 3, I think that Tunic is going to facilitate maybe one of the last big turns Bryce can have to get back into this game. Bryce also having a Codex of Frailty in hand at the moment. Looks like we are going to see the Tunic block.
Wow, yeah.
Just can't stomach the 2-card block.
I understand. I understand what Bryce is doing. I say you can't do anything if you make that Tunic block, but if you don't, you also can't do anything. You need to go ahead and preserve your arsenal here. So Bryce just put in the grinder by Taotao.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Leave No Witness is simply not hitting in this situation. You cannot let it hit. It is the number 1 priority to block that card. But we do see the Captain's Call buffing the Bolton shots. Okay, now I see the application of the card. Giving it go again.
It looks like Taotao's ready to accept this. Going to go ahead and just take 7 here. This is the first time we've really seen Taotao just hands up saying, go ahead, show me what you got.
Interested to see the potential pivot turn that Taotao has off the back of this with Bryce being at 10 life.
Yeah, and Bryce getting into such a vulnerable position at this point, at that 10 life, at that deck size, just everything Taotao does has a huge amount of threat. Now here comes a potentially big turn, and it's coming at a nice time as well. Frailty going to be shutting down any type of dagger shenanigans that Taotao was looking to do on the next turn. And a lot of Azuri's big turns are based on those daggers. They're about presenting really uncomfortable blocks, getting a little wide. So I think this was a good moment for Bryce to set up what he has here. Let's see what we can do in terms of damage.
Taotao not blocking the raw damage out of Bolton Shot and thus having the card economy to fully block Endless Arrow, one of the key cards in the matchup. Great situation.
Yeah, very smart from Taotao. Gets the clean block that he was looking for.
Okay, we are going to do that into, I assume, another codex and then maybe recur the same card.
Yeah, this or another Endless Arrow. I believe there is another one in the bin right now. So second Frailty coming through. Bryce going to go looking.
But look at the economy that, like the equipment economy Bryce is using here. And Taotao, all that Taotao has to do, throw down my hand.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. And has that deck size lead, has the life total lead, has the threat density lead. Going to go ahead, push some equipment forward. He says, I'm done with this tunic. I don't need it anymore. Oasis Respite cleans up this Endless Arrow. And Taotao just prioritizing. Do not let Bryce get card economy. Keep those Endless Arrows out of hand. And I think Taotao has found the exact game plan that they're supposed to present in this scenario.
Absolutely. Bryce's deck looking very, very thin right now.
Yep. Ponder going to go off, refill that arsenal. Taotao just passing on the turn, draws back up. Those frailties are cleared now. And you see the adaptability of Azuri. Taotao went into that turn. It started to look like a bit of a pivot turn potentially. Taotao just said, nope, I can modify my game plan here. I can reset and find a better way to deal with what you're presenting.
Yeah, I think what Bryce was telegraphing by that play was like, hey, here is my last way back into the game. And Taotao said, no problem. Here's 4 cards. I'll draw the next hand.
Yep. Just move on to the next one. That is Azuri's motto. I don't have to win on this turn. I'll win on a future turn. Do a little bit every turn. Win every turn cycle. Eventually that culminates in a game win, a match win, in a tournament win perhaps. Maybe Azuri looking to claim those first Living Legend points this weekend.
I'll tell you, Brian, usually when you're playing a deck like Taotao, you aren't winning both on deck size and life.
That's true.
That's a tough recipe to answer.
Searing Shot coming in here. Just going to go ahead and commit, annihilate the arm defense, taking a bit of damage. Quiver going to be activated. Looking to rebuy some critical arrows. Of course, have to be different names. You would love to just spike 3 endless arrows here, but it's going to be Bolton Shot. It looks like an Infecting Shot and a Endless Arrow. So representing as much damage as possible. But Brendan, that's a teeny little deck there.
So
that's not doing a whole lot.
I believe that's about, well, we'll see right here. Yep, 3 hands-ish, and a half
I think that was
Bryce.
8 cards, if I counted correctly. So, I mean, Bryce needs to find 25 damage and those 8 cards. And I get the sense this is a bit of just going through the motions right now for Bryce.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one to do. These quivers, though, adding a lot of power level 2 Ranger in the most recent set. Kind of a free roll added into the equipment. Kind of. It is a free roll added into the equipment. And being able to recur those 3 powerful arrows does help something like Lexi, do better against a strategy that used to really, really struggle against, which is this defensive fatigue. This game, we might not see that pan out, but still, we do see the tools are available to this Lexi deck. Nourishing Emptiness coming out for Vanilla 6.
Spider's Bite into Nourishing Emptiness. Bryce going to fall down to 3. No room to defend anymore. You need every single card, either for damage or to just not be fatigued. And Winter's Bite going to start things off here for Bryce. So a nice way to start your turn. Potentially take a card from the Azuri. It is just going to be a pitched Isolate. 1 resource floating. Let's see if Taotao can find a home for that in the future turns.
Wow. Brian, I thought coming into this tournament, I really didn't think a deck like Taotao's existed, a sort of dark horse deck that people were not expecting that was very good into Lexi. People have been touting Lexi as a deck that doesn't have bad matchups, is sort of at least 50 plus into the rest of the field. Looking at this, I think that Taotao's found it.
I'm not surprised, Brendan. Sorry if I'm playing spoiler a little bit, but I thought this was very much in the range of possibility, specifically from Azuri. And Taotao showing mastery of the Assassin class, a very different looking deck build. And look, there's a lot of tournament left to be played. We don't know where this metagame's going to end up. We don't know what's going to be the next step after Pro Tour Baltimore. But I will say that if Lexi goes on to have a dominant performance, I would encourage people to come back and look at round 4 of this tournament as to think about what is the next step to address this Lexi metagame. Taotao just happy to defend here. Going to be taking some of those on hits going into next turn with Frailty, with Bloodroot Pox, but also going into that turn with 19 health, a very comfortable number. Happy to take the damage from the Bloodroot Pox. Falls to 17. We know there's a bunch of sigils left in the deck. Strong defensive cards. Reds have been pitched throughout, so there's going to be lethal damage offered. And that means when you reach this stage of the game, lethal damage is a card from hand. That's why it's important. You don't even care about winning the game. You don't have to win. You just have to offer enough threat, and Bryce is going to be in the grinder one more time.
Absolutely, and Lexi not having a weapon, we're getting pretty close to the state where you could literally count up the attack values in the bottom left of all of Bryce's cards, and they wouldn't equal Taotao's life total.
Yeah, and you see Taotao just willing to take damage now. That's just a function of the damage that Taotao is able to present and Bryce's life total. He knows that he is now going to be demanding cards across turn.
Yeah, absolutely, your life total in Flesh and Blood is a resource and has given Taotao the room to be able to take this turn and pivot with a big hand onto Bryce, who does have 3 life left.
Yeah, it takes 5 more. And look, these life totals are getting closer. So when you look at the end of the game, you're going to say this one is pretty close. This is completely at Taotao's luxury. This is just a choice Taotao is making to go ahead and present a huge, huge threat on the next turn of this game.
Yep, will fatigue Bryce by damage, most likely.
Yeah, Endless Arrow is the play, so a nice arsenal there for sure. Now Taotao, again, shifts the plan a little bit, uses those cards on defense. Still expect, though, Taotao going to be able to present lethal on this turn, demand some cards from Bryce.
Yeah, Bryce, 5 cards total, 4 in hand.
And there's that Plague Hive coming back around for the second cycle. We're going to choose one of these at random again. They all feel good at this point, honestly. And it looks like it is going to be Frailty one more time, reducing that offensive output of Bryce, and Spider's Bite going to be the lead here. And this almost demands a block now, because if you don't, what do you do when that next stealth attack comes through? Do you put the rest of your hand in front of it? Do you leave yourself with 1 card? Spider's Bite gets through. Down to 2, and it looks like it is going to be Backstab out of Arsenal here, representing threat. How many cards does Bryce commit? I think it just has to be as many as possible. Looks like we're going to go ahead and put 3 cards in front. Yeah, and Taotao says that's fine. Another great thing Azuri can do in this spot, just save the card, let Bryce overcommit, keep that fatigue plan rolling.
That's the attack reaction paradox, right? If you think your opponent has pummel and you go to overblock and they can simply just pass and put it in Arsenal, you're going to be dealing with that question every time, and eventually by overblocking you will lose value, and thus most likely lose the game doing that. So sometimes you just can't play around it. We've seen Bryce basically has no cards left in deck.
Yep, and here's the Withering Shot, going to be cleanly blocked out by Taotao. Overblocking, knows there's plenty of room to just go ahead and use all the resources. Again, Spider's Bite, Nightmare Scenario, 2 cards in hand and in deck for Bryce. Yep, and it's just going to get the fist bump and an absolute clinic on Azuri put on by Taotao.